Welcome back. We're helping you make an informed decision before you vote in this November's general election. We've been bringing you live interviews with the candidates in key local races. Tonight, we highlight the race for Spokane County Prosecutor. Larry Haskell and Brian Beggs are going head-to-head. Tonight, Mr. Haskell joins us live in studio to answer some of your questions. Larry, thanks for being with us tonight. First, let's start off with, what would be the biggest changes you'd bring to the Spokane County Prosecutor's office?
I think the biggest change that you'll see with me as the county prosecutor is the level of involvement of the prosecutor himself. I will be out in the community. I expect to be much more responsive to the media than we have been. I think it's important that the public see what we do, understand what we do. So I think in doing that, I need to meet with as many members of the public in the community neighborhoods that we have throughout the Spokane area. And I also need to meet with the business leaders and see what's on their minds as well as work more with the new Justice Council that's starting up again. So there's a lot of opportunities for the prosecutor to be visible and make sure that the prosecutor's concerns are well aired and that everybody understands where we're coming from and why.
Does that also include in the courtroom, and is the prosecutor someone who just manages the deputy prosecutors, or does he go and do his own cases in the courtroom?
You know, I have a strong belief that it's very important for the public to see the county prosecutor, the elected prosecutor, in the courtroom. Is that going to be something I do every day? Probably not. There's a lot to do to run an office of this size. But I do believe that it's important for not only the public to see the prosecutor, it's important for the judges and also my other deputies to see that, hey, you know what? Larry's going to be out there. He's not just, you know, catching the headlines. He's doing the work too. It'll be a small caseload, but nonetheless, I feel it's very important.
We're also talking about crowding in the Spokane County Jail. Is alternative sentencing the key to reducing that overcrowding?
I think it's a very important part of it. The reform, in terms of the blueprint for reform that the county is adopting, has a number of alternatives, and we want to. I want to continue to do that as the elected county prosecutor. I've been doing some of that already, but I want to expand it. We're also looking at ways to shorten the stay that people have in the jail so that we don't endure the expense. And of course, I'm sure you've heard a lot of discussion on the issue of electronic home monitoring. And I've got some strong feelings about that as well. That's a viable option, but it needs some work. The legislature is well aware of some problems that we're having, and I'm concerned about it because, quite frankly, every time I, as the prosecutor, recommends to a judge that somebody be released from the jail, there is a risk management issue in terms of public safety. In the close calls, I will always lean towards the public safety.
There's been talk that swift justice kind of falls short when it comes to the Spokane County Prosecutor's office. What would you do as a county prosecutor to build back that trust?
I'm not sure exactly. The swift justice is important, but we're not the only player when it comes to that. Quite frankly, if you talk to the defense lawyers, they'll tell you that, you know, we have a client-driven business here. So ultimately, whether it's swift or it's lengthy will depend in part on what the defendant wants to do, because they're going to get continuances if they ask for them, and very often they do. But as far as assuring the public that we're doing everything we can to make sure that we move the system along, that's part of that education process that I was talking to you about. People need to understand the nuts and bolts of how the system works, and then they'll understand where the delays are. There are some built-in delays because neither the defense bar nor the state have the same exact interests. They have a client to represent. The state has the people's interest to represent.
Just real briefly, tell us why you'd be better than your opponent.
Well, there's a number of differences between my opponent and I. First difference that just stands out is the criminal justice experience. I've been doing direct prosecutions for over 13 years. I've been doing the sentencing alternatives that are legislatively authorized already. I've already been active in stimulating additional alternatives with the state legislature. I have the relationships with all of the people that work in the criminal justice system now, and contrary to what my opponent might have you believe, having somebody that's in the system right now, knowing what we do well and what we don't, is an asset to me. And in fact, that's one of the reasons the Spokesman Review gave me the edge and the endorsement in the race, was because I'm better positioned than my opponent. Additionally, my opponent focuses way too much, in my perspective, on the criminal needs. I focus more on the public. I focus more on the victims. I think those are very critical. They're statutory. So that's another main difference between my opponent and myself.
All right, that's all we have time for. Thanks for meeting with us today, Larry.
Thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure. And tomorrow night, same time, Brian Beggs will be live in studio to answer questions as well.